high school for the first time, so that's exciting. At a school called Army and Navy Academy in Carlsbad, California. So my background, though, has been teaching college courses, mostly first-year rhetoric and writing courses. I'm interested in digital literacy, digital rhetoric, and writing and multi-literacy center studies. That's kind of the bulk of my background and experience. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague to introduce himself.
Hey everybody, Jason Katsoff here, work for Adobe based south of Denver, working with the CU system as your customer success manager. Been with Adobe almost 6 years now. Prior to joining Adobe, I was faculty for 13 years at 3 different schools in the San Diego area where Jarret's now based. Also in education management as a department chair of media arts and also as the dean of academic affairs at the Art Institute of California prior to joining Adobe.
Thanks, Jason. So a few things I want to do today. Here's the little to-do list. I'd like to cover a little bit of background information. So things like, why did UCCS, our school, pilot Adobe Creative Cloud in first-year rhetoric and writing classes? So I'd like to get into that a little bit. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the things that, a few of the things that we value about multimodal composition. And if you're a little bit unfamiliar with that term, don't worry, I'll offer a brief definition here in just a couple of minutes. I'll also share just a few of the multimodal formats that I've used in my class and kind of for what assignments and activities, and then we'll move on to some other bit of background information. Part of today's presentation is going to be describing and kind of explaining what a fairly recent assessment looked like, where we assessed about 80 student multimodal rhetorical analysis projects and tried to get a sense for what's going on with these projects. What are students doing well? Where are they kind of falling short and why? And the goal for this kind of pilot assessment was to get a sense for basically like where we need to do better as instructors. Where are students confused? Where are they falling short? And how can we adjust as instructors to give them support in all of these different areas? Because while we were seeing them be very creative and being successful in some areas of these multimodal rhetorical analysis projects, we saw them struggling in other ways, and in ways that we didn't necessarily see when looking at traditional papers that they were writing previously in those classes. So I'm going to share with you all the rubric that we used and what we saw as some problems with this particular rubric. We'll also look at some representative examples of some of these multimodal projects. So I have some short videos, I have some web pages to share with you, hopefully to give you a better sense for like what kinds of work students are doing in our first year rhetoric and writing classes with these multimodal formats, because they really are doing incredible stuff. I also would like to share with you some of the challenges that were encountered during this assessment, the things that we were noticing, patterns of problems and issues that we were noticing across student projects. Some are issues that we'd see in standard papers as well, but some seem like kind of new issues, especially as students transition in the same class from a traditional paper to a project that's done in some kind of multimodal format. Kind of new issues and struggles arose, which I think were interesting. I'd also like to share some final thoughts and recommendations that were made by our assessment group for our program. Some things that I think we need to do better as both on a programmatic level, things that we need to help students more with from a pedagogical standpoint. I have 2 questions towards the very end of the presentation today, ones that I've been wrestling with for a number of years, and ones that I know my colleagues are thinking about as well. So I'm really hoping to give you all a chance to offer your thoughts, experiences, when it comes to these questions that I have. And then of course, hopefully in the last bit of time, I'd like to open it up to Q&A, where everybody can jump in, share their ideas in the chat box. We'd invite you to unmute your mics, things like that, so we can just open it up to a kind of a broader discussion. That would be great. Okay. So I'm going to talk here just for a little bit about background, and then I know Jason has a couple of things he'd like to share about Adobe and the Adobe Creative Campus event. So let me just click on that. So first thing I want to address, why is UCCS, why did they decide to pilot Adobe Creative Cloud in first year rhetoric and writing classes? And for anybody who's not familiar with Adobe Creative Cloud, it's a suite of applications, and I know Jason can speak more about this, that allows students to, and really any kind of creative people, to compose in a whole variety of ways. Anything from short form videos to web pages to professional digital portfolios and really everything in between. I do want to say, however, that students are welcome to use other kinds of programs and tools with which to do these projects. But since our program was piloting this, we kind of encourage them to at least try it out, see how it feels, some of these applications. And what they came up with a lot of the time was really great. So the decision to start piloting this was made by my program director to see how students use multimodal formats, specifically for rhetorical analysis projects. That's what our program does. We get students to think critically, to analyze, to be able to understand how speakers use certain strategies to persuade others. Why? So hopefully these students can in turn use these strategies to communicate more effectively, to be more persuasive in any communicative situation they find themselves in. It's about power. That's what our program believes in. Another thing was we saw value in building off of students' existing digital literacies. We understand well that students are very familiar with how to use and access a lot of different digital tools. They understand how people express ideas and communicate. And we wanted to kind of build off of those understandings in kind of more academic and productive ways, and to help them kind of potentially deepen their analytical work. We also saw multimodal composition as an area in our program that could be built up a bit. We saw this multimodal composition being kind of a foundational component to a lot of first year writing courses. And it was an area of our program that we were just kind of starting to dip our toes into. And frankly, we wanted to use kind of Adobe Creative Cloud as a way to get us thinking more consistently about multimodal formats and how to teach multimodal composition. And then the last thing, in terms of why we decided to pilot it, myself, some of my other colleagues, my program director, attended multiple conferences. Some of them are the Adobe Creative Campus that Jason will speak about in a moment. And we just saw these projects that students were doing. The level of sophistication and the videos and their ability to narrate and discuss their research findings, or to tell stories, or to share their analysis, and the kinds of work, the kinds of applicable work they were leaving with after leaving the university that would look so great in the eyes of potential employers. Those were just a few things that kind of got us on the road to piloting this, but also, as I said, kind of diving into multimodal composition a little bit more in depth. I also just wanted to share briefly a few things that we kind of believe about multimodal composition. And I want to just quickly define it for anybody who's a little bit unsure of what that means. And there are kind of different definitions and understandings of this idea of multimodality and multimodal composition. But for our purposes, when thinking about this within kind of the walls of our classroom, it's the ways that students use different modalities, written, oral, nonverbal, visual, textual, any of these kinds of things, to communicate and persuade. So basically how we use all of the tools, digital or otherwise, in front of us to be better communicators. That's the way that we're kind of thinking about multimodal composition. So one of the reasons that we kind of believe and value multimodal composition is we think that thinking in multimodal terms helps students better understand how media shapes their perception of the world around them. And certainly this all comes to play as students enter the job market, as I've said, and they find themselves needing to communicate in multiple modalities. More and more kind of jobs now are asking students not only to be able to speak effectively, but also be able to pull in and edit videos and sound clips together in order to make their points or deliver presentations or things like that. So understanding multimodal elements helps students better understand the visual aspects of the world around them. We also think that multimodal analysis helps students better access, assess, and analyze complex texts, and ultimately provides some foundational understandings when they do get around to composing multimodal texts on their own. In order to have the ability to create and compose effectively, first we need to sit down and understand the different components, the elements, how they're doing different kinds of rhetorical work, so then they can ultimately employ them. And then a couple of other things, and these were some kind of more nuanced insights that were actually compiled by our program director after attending a few conferences focusing on multimodal composition. And I really like these in terms of why we like to focus on multimodal composition in our program, or where we're trying to get there. So digital composing is valuable for marginalized populations who may not see themselves within modes of composing that are traditionally privileged in academia. And so giving students the chance to create web pages, short form videos, infographics, and things like that, I think invites students into the work in ways that they might feel on the outside looking in when we only do, or when we only kind of prioritize and value traditional standard papers. And I found that to be true, where students kind of floundered a bit with traditional papers. They came alive when given the chance to record, develop, edit videos, work on web pages, think really critically about how visuals are supporting what it is that they're writing about. We think that digital literacies allow students to do projects that matter personally to them and to the communities that they're a part of. And I think that there's some value to this kind of public facing work. Just this understanding that this web page or this video could be shared more broadly, I think encourages them to think more critically about how their choices, how their design choices are going to affect their audience beyond the walls of the classroom or beyond that one learning management system like Canvas and beyond just the eyes of the instructor. The other thing that we think multimodal projects do is it allows students room and time to play. And for anybody who's studied a little bit of learning theory and educational psychology, this is a cornerstone of how people learn, how young people learn. They need to be involved in play. That's when they're able to kind of tie concepts together and things like that. So giving them that creative space, that room to play, it's where I found students shine. And I'll share some of these examples with you, but some of the multimodal projects that I've loved and shared most widely are the ones where I've given students more creative freedom. So we'll talk more about that. We think of multimodal projects as a great place to gather feedback from students on the benefits that they see in digital composing, since these student voices help to make an argument for the value of this work. And so students, will have no problem kind of telling us what's going well with our approaches to multimodal composing, where they need more support, where they felt like they were successful. And actually these multimodal tools give us an ability to kind of collect all of this and kind of archive their responses so that we can make adjustments from one semester to the next. And then lastly, in terms of why we value multimodal composition, the value of digital tools for remembering and archival work, we think is very valuable, especially for creating opportunities for students to reflect on and document the current moment in time. So I had students, and I'll show you an example of this in a few minutes, last year, kind of in the swing of the pandemic, I gave students the option to do a project called Visual Rhetoric in the Time of the Pandemic. And they really used that project not only as a chance to do some analysis work, but like to really kind of reflect on what they were noticing, as hard as it is to think more about it and to kind of dissect that moment. I think for many of them, it felt like they were able to kind of hold it in front of them and examine it, and it kind of took them out of the moment a little bit. So that use of tools for archiving our feelings, our experiences, we think is valuable as well. And then I just wanted to share just really briefly a couple of the ways that I've used multimodal formats in my class. And I can share more of this with you all, but I've used videos, short form videos for assignment descriptions. I've had students use web pages and short videos and other kinds of things for discussion posts, which I'll share with you in just a moment. Students have used different kinds of multimodal formats to do in-class activities, typically to recap, analyze, or kind of go back over really important course readings and break down what it means, why it matters, and why it's kind of important. We've used multimodal formats for peer feedback. So I've had students give each other feedback kind of in audio, because sometimes they think that feels better and they're able to kind of express more of feedback and comments they have for their peers when they're just able to record it versus writing it all down. Same thing goes with video. I've had students use multimodal formats for author's notes, where they write about what they revised on a major project and how those revisions kind of contributed to the overall goal and success of that project. And then I've used videos, digital spaces, web pages for students to use to create final portfolios, where essentially they highlight the best work that they've done in the semester. They design a digital space that kind of visually represents their growth and understanding of key ideas from the course, and then use their own writing and reflections on their work as evidence to argue for the grade that they think they deserve in the class, kind of harkening back to this morning's presentation on grading. So I'd like to turn it over for a couple of minutes to my colleague, Jason, to talk a little bit about Adobe Creative Cloud.
Thanks, Jarret. Why don't you go ahead and click the logo lockup summary? I just want to dwell on that for a minute, and I'll turn it back over to you. I know the audience is anxious probably to see the student work and to see the results of your assessment, so we'll spend most of the time there. But basically, everybody, 5 years ago, Adobe recognized that there was an appetite for our tools across interdisciplinary areas of instruction, and not just the core areas that Adobe was used to, the designers, the multimedia artists, the filmmakers, the animators, the journalists, perhaps. So what you're seeing here is our latest collection of schools that have been designated as creative campuses. And you can see that Anschutz and CU Denver have both earned that designation. And really what we're looking for when we partner with schools is a true partnership. Right, we want to see that, like Jarret's describing, that Adobe Creative Cloud is integrated into curriculum, and we find that the best place to insert it is in the first year experience courses. So whether that's first year writing or some sort of interdisciplinary courses, psychology, other social sciences courses, and then to form a wraparound support structure, whether it's professional development that I or Adobe offers through conferences like COLTT. We're training up a bunch of instructional designers so that they can become, the trainers on campus, and then other support structures for students. So I work with student groups, Adobe student ambassadors, and really it depends on what the institution looks like and their overall culture. But we definitely want a partnership and find ways to, to ingrain Adobe across the curriculum and make sure everybody's supported in that aspect and that goal. So if you have questions for me, feel free to put them in the chat. I'd be happy to connect you with staff and faculty from any of the schools here on the logo lockup slide. If you have interest in how they got started or specific areas of how do you put certain areas into place or those types of things, I'll put my email in the chat as well. But I'm happy to be here with Jarret today, but he's the spotlight. So Jarret, I'm going to turn it back to you here.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jason. So the main reason I'm here, everybody, today is to talk a little bit about this assessment report that we did during the spring 2021 semester. I mentioned this a bit already, but there was 3 faculty members from the first year rhetoric and writing program, all on this committee. And all of these faculty members are interested in multimodal composition. They build in kind of multimodal composition strategies into our classes. They have students kind of thinking about all of this in one way or another. And so what we did was we assessed about 77 multimodal projects over 3 rounds with a lot of norming in between. We talked a lot about the student examples that we were seeing, kind of patterns of issues that we were noticing and why these issues we thought were coming up. Just so you know, all of these projects were final rhetorical analysis projects completed in the first year rhetoric and writing courses. And those courses are either stretch composition that happens over a whole year as opposed to one semester, our 1 semester length first year rhetoric and writing course, and then our second semester writing course, which is like a researched argument course. And so we assessed 1 student cohort from the previous fall 2020 semester. And as I said, the committee discussed questions or concerns along the way. One thing that I want to say about this is I do have some averages to share with you all, some data to share with you from this assessment, but I do today want to focus more on kind of patterns of issues that we're noticing in this progress in this assessment, and the recommendations from the group based on this pilot assessment work. There will be a larger assessment done soon that looks comparatively at scores from traditional papers and multimodal projects. I'm interested to see that information as well. But for today I just kind of want to share some interesting kind of findings from this pilot assessment. Okay, so here's the rubric, and these numbers that you're seeing here, everybody, are numbers that represent the average score for all assessed multimodal artifacts across the rubric criteria. One bit of feedback that we did have at the end of this entire semester, entire assessment for our program, was we felt that with regard to the rubric, it needs to be revised to reflect more specific components of multimodal composition. We simply felt there wasn't enough language represented in the rubric to really like acknowledge or appreciate what students were doing or be able to kind of assess specific kind of aspects about multimodal. This rubric is kind of more geared towards more kind of traditional final projects, more traditional papers. So there's a couple of things here that I want to emphasize. And again, I know these numbers, they don't pop off the page without being able to kind of compare them to looking at scores from traditional papers, but it gave us some things to talk about as a program and some areas that we think we need to work on. So the first one, I want to maybe start with the good. Number 6 here, organization. We found whether students were doing videos or web pages or prezis or other kinds of kind of digital visual projects, students understand organization. Over and over, we saw students building in really useful subheadings. They were typically pretty good at transitioning from one section into another, despite the format that was being used. We thought that was interesting. Students were really successful in this area. In terms of number 8 here, language usage, students tended to score pretty highly in our assessment in this area. We kind of theorized that this might be because as a program, we kind of value students having a right to their own kind of written voice, and using whatever means they need to express themselves. So typically, we scored pretty high there. There weren't a lot of major issues in that area. Number 2 here, applies rhetorical concepts. So the application of rhetorical concepts that we look for in all of our major projects, along with engagement with texts and evidence selection, pretty much across the board was not adequate. I'll just say that. Students tend to kind of forget about the need to include these concepts, to integrate them, to fold them into their discussion. They kind of forget about the need of pulling in outside voices, outside texts to support their own analysis. And the same thing goes with evidence. Students tend to the evidence that they're using to back up really kind of shrinks down quite a bit, or is fairly non-existent in these multimodal projects, especially compared with what students were doing kind of earlier in the semester with like a traditional paper. We saw a lot of the evidence of this: rhetorical concepts, engagement with text, evidence selection and evaluation. But when they moved into another format, I don't know, maybe they were kind of overwhelmed by all of these options in front of them and kind of forgot about that. So those were a couple of interesting things that I think gave us some things to talk about and some areas to focus on pedagogically as we continue to kind of teach multimodal composition. So I wanted to share with you, everybody. I'm sure you're looking to see some student examples, and I'd love to share some with you. But before we do that, I want to just share a couple of student reactions, and these are really representative. So representative reactions and responses to using multimodal formats. And these responses came from surveys that I conducted in my classes, just kind of checking in with students about how, what their experience was like using Adobe Creative Cloud applications or other multimodal formats to do this work. And some of these student responses also came from the faculty course questionnaires. So many students said things like, using different formats for the projects was very helpful, was staying engaged and excited about the projects. Oftentimes by paper 3, they're starting to get a little bit burnt out. So students like the ability of moving from a standard paper to a multimodal project and then doing different things along the way. Another student said, this course did help me grasp a better idea of using multimodal sources rhetorically. Purposeful pictures are just as important as purposeful text. So the student understanding kind of the value of visuals and making a point or making arguments. The student said, I love using different techniques during this course. I think it's important to make us versatile in the things we are able to write. Doing multimodal projects enabled me to tap into my creative side and really enjoy writing, which is always great to see. We always want to see students enjoying the writing process. And then I often get comments like a little bit not on the negative side or a little bit different of a tone. I prefer to write normal standardized papers. And then lastly here, I feel that navigating through the Adobe Creative Cloud was just too hard and it was not worth the time it took to learn a new program. And indeed, this is something that myself and my colleagues talk about all the time. We need to teach rhetorical analysis, writing process, and so many other things. Is there time to also be able to teach how to build and edit within these different formats that students and oftentimes teachers aren't even really comfortable with or familiar with yet? So what is that learning curve, and are there other ways to flatten it? Okay, so I wanted to share a few representative examples that were kind of encountered in this assessment. So the first one I'd like to share with you, everybody, is I'm just going to share a clip of this. So this is a Nike ad rhetorical analysis that was done by a student. And I think this student's doing some pretty interesting work. I think she's found a pretty nice balance and way of narrating over the top of text and having visuals and videos playing. So these are some of the projects that we encountered in the assessment, and I just wanted to share this with you.
For pathos, it shows professional athletes giving it their all and then being made to feel crazy for showing their emotion. This plays towards Nike's audience because a lot of women can relate to this, not just in sports, but in everyday life when they cry or show frustration towards something. By the end of the commercial, it then goes on to use logos because it uses precedence by saying,
but a woman running a marathon was crazy.
Officials tried to pull her off the course.
A woman boxing was crazy. A woman dunking? Crazy. Coaching an NBA team? Crazy.
All these examples show monumental historical events that have taken place and have moved women steps closer to full equality. These examples motivate the audience that even though they are being called crazy right now, soon they will make history and it won't matter anymore. Lastly, apostrophe repetition is used in this commercial because it repeats crazy at the end of almost every sentence. This ad is to empower women in all sports. It leaves a message in every woman's head that Nike is the option when it comes to being who you want to be, no matter what people say.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. You all could hear that all right, yeah? Sound came through? Okay, lovely. So that was one example, an analysis of an advertisement or ad campaign. That's kind of a cornerstone assignment in our program. The student, I think, is doing a lot of really great things that we want to see more evidence of in multimodal projects. There's lovely narration with analysis, but there's also evidence being shown on the left side, right, where there's the video or a little clip of the advertisement is playing while she's talking through it, and then there's text kind of isolating the specific rhetorical strategies at play. I mean, just a really nice job seen there. So I wanted to look at another example real quick. Here's a example of the students taking on this assignment that was optional to look at rhetoric in a time of pandemic. And so this student looked at all of the rhetoric that was going on during the pandemic that caused sort of polarization within our kind of society and the ways we were thinking about what was going on and how to handle it. And so this was a much more open project, one where I just wanted students to really just kind of be creative and reflect on how the moment is going for them and pull in. You can see more evidence of them pulling in text that we were looking at in class. I wanted to share this. This was kind of an interesting one. She looked at the difference in Domino's ads, where before the pandemic, it was them coming into the restaurant and kind of eating indoors. And then the second one here, it's all about contact delivery and being at home with family. So just how the strategies change from one ad to another, given the changes in societal moments. And so lastly, I just wanted to share with you this one I like. This is done on Adobe Spark page. This is what a lot of students opt in terms of a format to do projects. And this is where in my visual rhetoric class, I had students think through this idea of authenticity, how authenticity is represented in online spaces. Is authenticity real? What are the ways that people pretend to be authentic but are not? How do you represent yourself in an authentic way? And so this was a lovely project where students really kind of chewing on this idea of what it means to be authentic, what authenticity means or looks like in online space, and so forth. So again, I think when students have a chance to be creative and when there's not too many parameters, at least from my experience, this is where they tend to shine with some of these multimodal projects. Okay, so those are some good things. Some things I appreciate, some things I enjoyed. I want to share with you some things that are quite common in terms of issues and kind of problems we were seeing during this assessment of multimodal projects. So I'm just going to kind of share, let's see. Okay. This one is pretty representative of things that we saw during this assessment. So keep in mind that this is a final rhetorical analysis project. The amount of writing and content that students have typically should equate to about 7 or 8 pages, where they're analyzing and making an argument and so forth. And so this is the beginning of it. The only thing before this page is the title page. And this is a lot of what we get. A little chunk paragraph, some visuals, a little blurb here about athletes wanting to improve their skills. I guess this is about Under Armour's ads, some info about the CEO, and then they just run out of steam. And there's nothing beyond that. And this happens over and over again. And I've had to tell my students very explicitly, like the project that you did before this multimodal project, you did it in a standard paper. You all wrote beautifully and eloquently. You wrote like 6 or 7 pages. That all can't just go away now that you're doing a video or web page. I still need all that stuff. So one of the things I'm trying to figure out is like, what causes this to happen? Where and why are students getting burned out, running out of steam as they take on these multimodal formats? Because I think for some people, they think like, oh, this is a chance to be creative. I'm going to take this and make it my own. But oftentimes we see just a complete kind of shrinking of content and writing. Whether it's a podcast that's only a minute long, or a video that's only 45 seconds long, or a web page with 2 paragraphs, none of that equals kind of what we're looking for in terms of the depth of writing and analysis that we're asking. And so I'd like to turn things over. I've been talking with you and at you for a while now, everybody. This is a major question that I'm thinking through in terms of why students are running out of steam. And I would love it if you could jot down thoughts in the chat box, and Jason and I can kind of help to field them. But here's the question. Does the genre of multimodal projects conflict with what we are asking students to accomplish with these academic projects? How do you reconcile these differences? Do you have any experience with this? And so, like, in other words, when we think about a web page and a web page that we're looking at in real life on our computers, typically they're not like 8 pages long. It's usually kind of shorter information, more to the point. There's combination of visuals and videos. And so I wonder if if some of these understandings about the genre are getting in the way of what we're asking students to do on an academic level. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, give you a chance to think and write, and then we'd love to take a look at some of your questions.
So Jarret, I don't know if you have the chat pod open, but Natasha was kicking us off, but more about the rubric and the assessment and how you factor in the technological presentation. And where is that counted? Is it counted in the organization of the rubric, or what other assessment point there?
Yeah, so that was one of our main kind of criticisms of the rubric that we were using, is that we need more kind of specific language about how different kind of modalities are used, how different elements are being used. Pretty much the only thing we scored them on in terms of those multimodal components was a section that was just based on kind of multimodality, but there wasn't any kind of specific language about how images or videos or other kinds of visuals were being used as evidence to support arguments, or how they were able to kind of fold in videos or original photography as a way to gain audience interest and attention early on in the project. We just need far more language that describes what we're looking for from students in these multimodal projects. And so using this rubric was really challenging in a lot of ways. And in fact, I think a lot of the scores are lower just because a lot of the projects that were submitted by instructors weren't really multimodal projects. They were like PDFs with an image at the very top. And so that's some of the things we need to get kind of clearer on as a program.
Gotcha. And now the chat pod is getting far more active, which is great. We appreciate that. So Alicia Swendler says she doesn't have the problem that you have regarding shrinking content, that she signs infographics quite often, and that students don't have a problem creating 2 full pages of content that meets the outcomes.
Yeah. She
says maybe it matters based on the prompt, and the prompt has enough depth so that they can visually represent. Yeah,
and I think that's right. And this is something that I've seen other faculty members do. So, I mean, part of our role and responsibilities as instructors in this class is to hit a certain amount of words. For every student needs to hit, I think it's 20 or 25,000 words a semester. And so that's part of needing them to write these longer kind of written projects. But some faculty have wondered, like, well, maybe we can have students do kind of these multimodal projects like an infographic or short video as a way to kind of supplement the writing work that they've already done, kind of like a research poster, right? The research poster doesn't really stand on its own. It's attached to a lot of other research on the front end. And so that's kind of one way we've been thinking about it and wondering about it too.
Nice.
So these questions are great. I want to come back to them because I know we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to just quickly kind of hit on, just show you just a couple other examples here of things that we're seeing. And I'd be interested to talk about this more because I'm honestly not sure. So one of the things that we were kind of wondering about or concerned about was just a lack of audience awareness and clear purpose. Oftentimes it felt like students are kind of just talking into a void. I'm analyzing just to analyze. I have no idea why, but here I am doing it. Instead of things like, well, I'm analyzing social media because it's going to become increasingly important to understand how these companies are working to persuade us because of advertisements, or our lives are only becoming more and more inundated with advertisements, and so it's important to understand how ads work. That's why I'm analyzing this McDonald's ad or whatever it might be. But seeing the work that they're doing, kind of a larger context, is something that we're looking for. But what's interesting, like in this example, and then I'm just going to kind of speed through a little bit, is I see them. So this was an introduction to a multimodal project, and I can see them kind of struggling a little bit with what to do here. Perhaps it's the genre that they're kind of trying to negotiate alongside what our expectations are for academic writing. But you can see this kind of almost sounds like a movie trailer or something. In a world plagued with struggle, masked in success, the endless battle of those suffering in silence continues to be overlooked. Like, that's a pretty nice way to start a project. I think it captures our attention. But then this is the basis of their intro. And from an academic standpoint, we want to see them kind of use the intro as a chance to kind of contextualize their project a bit more, give us a sense for what's coming and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with conclusion, just kind of on the ways they bookend their projects. It seems very rushed, like they're not sure what to do. And then in general, what we saw were some patterns of underdeveloped ideas, discussion, and analysis. So in this section, the student is analyzing logos, the rhetorical effect of logos in an advertisement for a company. And this would be a section that I could imagine them putting a lot of time into, thinking about the effect of logos, pulling in evidence to support why logos are persuasive, just chewing on this a bit more. And really, we just get a few sentences. And this happens a lot in multimodal project. Like, this is the thing that we want you to write about, like linger here for a lot longer. Same thing here, addressing kind of the purpose of the ad. This is a big part of what we want students to think through in their analytical projects. What is the purpose for this ad? How is it successful and why? And they just kind of barely skim into it and then move on. So I wanted to just quickly share some challenges that we encountered during this assessment work. And I tried to break this into 3 kind of categories, just to make it a little bit more digestible. And so I see that there's challenges on 3 different levels. First, on a program cohesion level, a pedagogical level, and then kind of just a student readiness level. So in terms of program cohesion, not all faculty are on the same page about what constitutes a multimodal project. As I said, we got everything from Prezi presentations to PowerPoints to PDFs to web pages to videos to podcasts. And some of these didn't quite meet up with what we were looking for and thinking about when we thought about a multimodal composition. I'm not sure that an image at the top of a document necessarily constitutes a multimodal project. Secondly, there doesn't seem to be a clear or cohesive vision of how multimodal formats enhance or clarify rhetorical analysis work that we're asking our students to do. What are the specific ways that we are looking for students to use these different modalities to improve their thinking, deepen their thinking, enhance their analysis? I don't think we're really sure about that yet. We're hoping that it'll kind of come more into focus, but we're not really sure about how these formats kind of play out in students' abilities to think in an in-depth way about whatever it is they're analyzing. From a pedagogical standpoint, students need more guidance on how evidence is valued and integrated in multimodal projects. So we saw a lot of student projects that threw in images, didn't talk about them, didn't include any evidence whatsoever to back up their points or their claims. And that was troubling because that's not what we see in traditional papers. Students seem to be quite aware of the need for those things when they're writing a paper. Students need more guidance on how to incorporate and discuss visuals. I kind of talked about that already. So they know that visuals are a good thing to include, but they don't reference them, they don't cite them, they don't discuss them explicitly at all. And so along those lines, instructors need to spend more time providing models and teaching students proper citation and multimodal formats. So oftentimes there's no works cited page. Oftentimes what we've seen in these projects, there's no in-text citations, there's no reference of outside sources. That all kind of melts away for some reason when we move into other formats. In terms of student readiness, some projects use existing templates that organize information in unoriginal ways. Some projects were designed poorly for the multimodal genre, meaning there were like fonts that were difficult to read. It was visually disorienting in terms of design choices. Even in high visibility formats like web pages, videos, things that can be shared easily, it often feels like students are writing into a void. Introductions seem rushed, don't offer much context, and then technical competencies may limit some decisions for multimodal design, meaning students just aren't sure how to do some of this stuff. So some final thoughts. We think that faculty could benefit from clearly defining and understanding the criteria for what makes a project multimodal, first and foremost. That's really, really important for us moving forward. Faculty could benefit from conversations about multimodal composition strategy. So, you know, this is something we've been wondering about. Is it better to have students compose in traditional ways first and then like pull over all that stuff and do a podcast or video? Maybe. But then what we found is that podcasts sound like there's just somebody reading off a paper, whereas podcasts typically sound like it's more of a free-flowing conversation. Same thing goes for video. If they just write it all out in paper first and then bring it over to a video, it sounds like somebody's just reading off of a paper for 6 pages. And that's not really the way that videos are designed and edited and kind of put together. It doesn't sound quite right. We need more professional development, focusing on foundational theories of visual rhetoric and multimodal composing. So a little bit here in terms of path forward. Needs to be a more cohesive vision on what it means to include images or other multimodal elements in a project. Our program should focus on finding and increasing our use of professional published multimodal compositions as models. We just need more workable models that we can assess both as faculty, on a faculty level, and with our students. One of the things we need to figure out is why content is shrinking so much. So the length of the multimodal project came far short of what our expectations were for a traditional paper. Instructors need to carve out time to study and assess features of real world multimodal text together. So, we need to explicitly call out and negotiate what we value about things like web pages, podcasts, short form and long form videos, infographics, things like that. Students are quite familiar with these formats, but there is this myth of the digital natives that, and people have been talking about this very recently, that just because students are familiar with it, that they can easily build these kinds of texts together. And I think that work needs to be done together with students and faculty. So that could look like negotiating, co-creating, and collaborating on rubrics together, if you feel like that's the best route. After you kind of assess all of these multimodal projects together. And then lastly, I just want to say, I think we need to be more transparent with students about why we are having them compose analysis projects in multimodal formats. Typically, it's just like, I know we had you do the standard paper, now you're doing a video or a web page, and that's just the way it is. But we don't really bring them into the kind of the behind the scenes conversations about why we're having them do that. So I think inviting them into that, having them read a little bit of that scholarship around multimodal composition and how it kind of pays off in their other classes, as they enter the employment world and so forth. Okay, so those are just a few things. Thank you for staying with me. I know we are almost out of time. I have just one question here, and I want to just open it up in the last minute or so. This is one question I'm thinking about. How do we help students achieve a depth of thought in different modalities? Okay, so I'd like to take a minute maybe and address questions. Jason, was there any that kind of popped up over the last few minutes that you wanted to, that you thought were good or wanted to tackle? I know I can kind of skim through too.
Yeah, some agreed upon themes, and one is providing suitable exemplars and even having students analyze those exemplars prior to creating anything themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at great examples, what do they value about those different examples, setting up that criteria for what they want from a web page or video.
Yeah. There was also concern about spending time finding and designing assets that could have been spent on writing.
Yeah. And that's one we wrestle with. I mean, there's only so much time in a semester. And so usually when you want to prioritize something else gets left behind. And so that's always a challenge, especially as you're pulling in kind of more sophisticated formats that you want students to experiment with.
Yeah. There was also concern about accessibility, for people that are either visually impaired or hearing impaired, and what are the design choices around those impairments or suitable for those reaching those audiences? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I don't know the answer to that, particularly with the Adobe Creative Cloud applications. But with multimodal format, what comes with that is choice. Students have absolute choice for what makes the most sense for them, what they feel comfortable with, what they want to explore, where and how they want to push themselves in terms of being creative and expressing their ideas. So I think that choice is a big part of kind of the appeal of multimodal composition as well.
Right. There's also good suggestions around scaffolding and having students do some writing first and then do some research around multimodality and how they adapt the writing up front into those various formats. Yeah,
I love that idea. So kind of stopping in between.
Suggestions that it gives me ideas for next year's COLTT around a panel, because I think everybody here has experience in it and creating multimodality. So to get them on a panel and best practices and pitfalls and other things like that. So between Leisha, our host, and me, maybe we can curate a panel for this time next year.
Absolutely. That is our time, I believe, everybody. I don't want to hold you over too much. I just want to say thank you so much again for coming. Here are both of our emails up on the screen if for any reason you want to contact us to talk more about this. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for Q&A. Love to talk with you more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.